One of my favorite parts of this early age of the internet has been the ability to track one's lineage, like going to an ancestry.com and that type of thing. And this one time, I was able to actually trace some of my family tree all the way back to Ireland, and I was able to find the family crest of the Thule family, and it was just really cool. And my imagination took over a little bit, and it put images in my mind of like a home where the family sits around the table, and there's a fireplace over against the wall, and above the mantle of that is this coat of arms with a shield and a helmet and swords and the name Thule across the top. Now, I don't know if that's exactly how it worked back then, but it did make you feel as if you were part of something, that was bigger and something that was rooted. And that, to a large degree, is exactly what the gospel writer Matthew is doing in the first 17 verses of his book about Jesus, the Messiah. In many societies, being able to trace your family pedigree is very, very important. In societies that are more traditional in nature, like say some of the tribal areas of the world, being able to follow the thread back into your past is vital about knowing who you are. And being able to tell the story of your ancestry is really being able to tell the story of who you are. It's like having a well-crafted resume that you're ready to give to a potential employer. So if you're new to the Bible and you're thinking, I'm going to start at the beginning of the New Testament just to kind of get an idea of who this Jesus is, then what you're going to do is you're going to open up the book of Matthew, chapter 1, and you're going to read this really long list of names. And then you may decide just to close the book up because that didn't mean anything to you and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, some of the names you probably can't even pronounce. But just bear with me a minute, and I think I can help you understand what's happening here. For people that lived in the Jewish world of Matthew's time, this list of names is like a Memorial Day parade that's coming down the road. You're sitting on the side of the road and you're kind of leaned in to see who's coming next down the line. There's a lot of anticipation to see who's going to have that place of honor at the end of the parade. And Matthew is a Jewish storyteller from the time of Jesus who is trying to make this point. You see, most Jews telling the story of Israel's history, they're going to begin with Abraham. Abraham was the father of 13 sons who became the leaders of that young nation. But as the family's tree's branches began to extend out, only one of those tribes would be able to lay claim to a descendant named King David. And even fewer would be able to say that they were a descendant of King Salmon and all of the other kings of Judah until the time of the exile. After the exile, the monarchy quit functioning. Well, there were kings and queens that were still around, but none of them could say that they were the true bloodline from back to David and back to Abraham. In a future video, we're going to meet a guy named King Herod. And I'll tell you, he had no royal blood in him at all. He wasn't even fully Jewish. Herod was this opportunistic military leader whom the Romans had put into place and made a king to ensure that basically Roman interests were secure in that region of the world. But despite that, there were some living in the land who were living with great anticipation. Those people knew that they descended from the line of Israel's true kings, the ancient kings of old. So in their minds, when they're reading this list of names that Matthew is laying out for them, they were ultimately listening to a political statement. Imagine if one of Herod's spies overheard that you were boasting about being a part of a true royal family, and not this puppet regime that the Romans have set up through Herod. But this is exactly the statement that Matthew is making at the beginning of his book. And he's doing it on Jesus' behalf. And he did it in such a way as not to necessarily make Jesus one of many in the line, but Jesus was the goal of the whole list from the beginning. In fact, Matthew puts the list together in groups of 6. Okay, 6 groups of 7 names. Now the number 7 was and still continues to be incredibly important, a powerfully symbolic number, and to be born at the beginning of the 7th 7, this was clearly a climax. Matthew's point is this, that this birth is what Israel had been waiting for 2,000 years. Okay, so Abraham, the founding father whom God had promised to make a nation. Abraham, who had been given the land of Canaan with the assurance that all nations would be blessed by him. Abraham gets to kick this thing off. And then down a little ways, we run into King David, whom God had promised true lordship over the whole world. And then down a little ways, we read names of those who took part in the exile, without king or kingdom. And those people waited and waited and waited for a deliverer. Now, this is the moment, near the end of the parade, when a child is born, who would fulfill layers and layers and layers of history and promises and waiting and prophecy. But it happened in a very strange way, because Matthew is about to tell us a story about a young girl named Mary and her fiancé Joseph. Mary had become pregnant, not by Joseph, but through the Holy Spirit, almost as if to remind the reader that God uses sometimes strange ways to make his plans come to be. But there are strange things that happen all the way through this parade. If you go back in the parade, you take Judah. Judah treated his daughter-in-law like a prostitute. You take Boaz. Boaz is the son of the prostitute Rahab, who wasn't Jewish, but who escaped with the Jews when they invaded a town, and she married into the line, and that's where we get Boaz from. King David was an adulterer with the wife of Uriah the Hittite, and yet through that relationship, the lineage continues all the way down to Mary and Joseph. Millions of Christians have read this genealogy as the beginning of their own exploration of who Jesus is. And so now that we have a little understanding why Matthew began his account this way, we're ready to go deeper into the story. You see, Matthew is telling us that Jesus is the fulfillment of promises and longings of the past, but Jesus is also about something new that's happening. And God still works like that today, keeping his promises, consistent in character, and yet so full of surprises for those who are willing to learn to trust him.